Fans, for the past 2 weeks you have been reading about the bad break I got. Yet today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of this earth. Lou Gehrig spoke those words on July 4th, 1939, in front of tens of thousands of fans when he realized his baseball career was over due to a diagnosis of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. ALS is a progressive neurodegenerative disease that affects nerve cells in the brain and the spinal cord. Motor neurons reach from the brain to the spinal cord and from the spinal cord to the muscles throughout the body. The progressive degeneration of the motor neurons in ALS eventually leads to their death. When the motor neurons die, the ability of the brain to initiate and control muscle movement is lost. With voluntary muscle action progressively affected, patients in the later stages of this disease may become totally paralyzed. In the United States, 5,600 people are diagnosed with a form of ALS every year. After being diagnosed with ALS, only 50% will live for another 3 years, and 10% will live for 10 years or more. ALS is a devastating disease for the patient and for those in their life. Stories like Michelle's from Kansas City, in which she was diagnosed at the age of 45. Michelle is married and the mother of 2 twin girls. She continues to live her life to the fullest and keep her hopes of hope for a successful treatment. However, Michelle lives with the reality that her body is deteriorating and it cannot be stopped. With this tragic diagnosis, Michelle just wants this to be her family's only encounter with ALS. Pete was diagnosed when he was 65 with ALS. His daughter TT moved her dad to St. Louis, where the family lives, to receive treatment from the ALS Center. Pete and his family's lives were forever altered because of his diagnosis. Pete never gave up in his fight to defeat ALS. However, after battling for 8 years, he realized it was time. Pete died in his home with his family after being on a ventilator for a couple months. Michelle and Pete's family want to share their stories in order to raise awareness about this horrible disease. The symptoms of ALS vary from one patient to the next. One patient may have trouble lifting and the next have slurred speech. Over the years, with new medicine Riluzole and better understanding of the disease itself, survival time averages around 3 to 5 years, with low numbers of people living 10 or more. ALS is known to have stopped its progression, but there is no medical explanation for why the disease stops its progression. The progression of ALS normally begins in the hands or feet, making everyday activities such as walking, eating, and washing very difficult. Eventually the disease will spread and affect speech, swallowing, chewing, and most tragically breathing. Once the lungs are affected by ALS, the patient will need to be placed on a ventilator. Because ALS attacks only motor neurons, the sense of touch, hearing, sight, smell, and taste are not affected. The muscles in the patient's eye and bladder also seem to be unaffected. There are certain risk factors or patterns that doctors have noticed regarding ALS. The worst being that the disease could have been passed hereditary to the child from the parents. This would result in the child having a 50-50 chance of having the disease. ALS most commonly occurs in people between the ages of 40 and 60. Doctors have found that before the age of 65, men are at a slightly higher risk to get ALS. There are also certain environmental factors that could increase your risk of getting ALS. Smoking, lead exposure, and military service all raise the risk of getting ALS. It is not exactly known what about military service triggers ALS, but speculation includes traumatic injuries, certain metals or chemicals, viral infections, and intense exertion. Genetic testing is offered to see if the patient has SALS, sporadic ALS, or FALS, which is familial ALS. Familial ALS is more rare than SALS, which occurs in about 90% of the patients. The best way to establish which form of ALS a patient has is to examine their family medical history. ALS is currently affecting approximately 30,000 Americans today. The ALS Association has been trying to create a world without ALS. With your help, we can make sure that no more families suffer from this tragic disease. Thank you.